Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this video in this subject that I thought was going to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video by the channel that I like to review, probably the most of all, Boxing Ego, because at times, once again, I think he can bring up good points, but a lot of the times his judgment also is clouded by his over emotionality, and by his irrationale, and a lot of the times by his bias, especially racial bias. He is a fan at the end of the day, and I get it. But Boxing Ego and a lot of these LDBC and new media channels, they always try to tell you that, I tell the truth and all sort of stuff. Most channels and most people in general really don't tell you the truth. They tell you what they want to be the truth. That's pretty much what it is. And don't get me wrong, we're all going to be biased to a certain degree because it just depends on what generation you come from, what demographic you are, what race you may be, or what ethnicity you may be. We're all going to be a little bit biased to a degree. We're all going to have different perspectives. But a lot of the times with these guys, it's so blatantly obvious with their hypocritical ways, that a lot of the times it can just get a little bit obnoxious. But the reason why I like to review their videos once again is to a lot of the time show certain narratives that I believe to have double standards or that I believe to be a little bit hypocritical. And the reason why I do this is because Ego and Dante and a lot of these other guys, they're not the only ones that believe it. There's thousands of boxing fans and people that believe that narrative. So I always like to put my opinion out there and address the narrative as well. But anyways, in this video, enough of the intro. The thing about this conversation is going to be that of the Terence Bud Crawford and Jaron situation. Of course, for those of you that watched the very big fight, the very big matchup, but not so great fight between that of Terence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence Jr., you know that Terence Bud Crawford, that he pretty much whooped up on Errol Spence Jr., from pillar to post for 9 rounds. And of course, he was able to get the stoppage by the referee. And he had a great performance, no doubt about it, at least in my view. Now, of course, some people like Ego would state that Errol Spence was nowhere near the same fighter. I'm not going to personally state that, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the point is now, for those of you that have not heard the news, that Terence Bud Crawford, he recently got stripped of his IBF title, when he was recently undisputed, because I believe that the IBF does not recognize rematch clauses for that of a mandatory. And on top of that, Terence Bud Crawford has also stated multiple times that he's not interested in Jaron Ennis. And now, of course, a lot of people, especially certain Errol Spence Jr. fans or people that maybe didn't like Terence Bud Crawford, they're claiming that, he's now ducking that of Jaron Ennis. Do I necessarily agree with that? Well, I think that Terence Bud Crawford isn't interested in the Jaron Ennis fight, but I'm not really going to call it a duck. And within this video, I'm going to tell you why. Because a lot of people, they take a look at certain fighters and they're like, oh, well, certain fighters, they need to fight the best of the best and they need to fight always the toughest challenges. And while, that seems very good on the surface, there's a little bit more that goes into that. Not only is there a business side of boxing, but there's also a legacy side of boxing. And I think when Terence Bud Crawford takes a look at Jaron Ennis, I don't think that he takes a look at it at a Jaron Ennis, fight. I don't think he takes a look at that fight as rewarding enough in terms of a business or legacy side. And I'll explain why, throughout this video. But anyways, let's get straight into it. Let's see what Boxing Ego has to say.
Oh yeah, it goes down around these parts. Jaron boots in his G-checks Terence Crawford after Crawford took to social media, had some things to say. Find out what both Buds and Boots had to say. I don't think... Well, let me just get into it. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Best in the business, and it's not even close. I'm one away from Michael to beat it. So, Terence Crawford has taken to his social media, and I mean, you see all these. These are a lot of, he does almost sporadic tweet rants, like these tweet storms, and he just keeps firing. So let me try to take it from the top, and get to the beginning of this. So I made a video about this one, but just to recap, since we're talking about Boots, I see a lot of Spence fans mad at me and jumping on Boots' sack now. I love it. This is the same ish I got and heard for 5 years. I was scared, this and that. It's okay. Everyone just accept it. He spelled accept wrong. Accept it.
Stop using gas station air pumps to fill up your tires. Seriously.
I'm great, and y'all mad about it. Again, I thought this was a weird tweet personally because I don't see how Errol Spence fans, what do they have to do with boots? And why do you believe that?
Well, I understand a little bit of your point, boxing ego, but let's also be real here and let's not play dumb. A lot of the times when it comes to that of sports, when a certain particular person or a fan especially, when they hate a certain athlete or when they hate a certain fighter, when that fighter ends up winning that big matchup, a lot of the times, they're very annoyed that that fighter ended up winning that matchup. So they'll pretty much cling on to whoever they think can beat them, or whoever is going to fight them next. That's just pretty much how fans work. So do I believe that a certain amount of the Errol Spence Jr. fans are probably saying that Terence Bud Crawford is avoiding Jaron Boots-Ennis? I'm not going to say that all of them are saying that, but do I believe that some of them did that? Yeah, of course. That's just part of the course or par for the course in terms of sports. Happens all the time. Happens in tennis, happens in basketball, football. Excuse me. Happens in fighting as well. Happens all the time.
Jaron Boots-Ennis's fans happen to be like ex Errol Spence fans. Like, I don't see the correlation. You just like pretty much made that up, right? So I think that's weird. The other thing that I've noticed is if you listen to Crawford, he did some interviews yesterday. He's very passive aggressive, hot and cold, where he'll kind of give Boots some props, but then he'll kind of immediately take away by saying something negative. So it's like I said, it's just real passive aggressive. He says, "Everyone, I know y'all loving Boots right now, and that's good. I'm happy for the young guy." So, okay, see, seemingly sounds pretty straight up and down. But chill on the I'm ducking him part, right? So, again, passive aggressive. Everyone, I know y'all loving Boots right now, and that's good. I'm happy for the young guy, but chill on the I'm ducking him part. Boots had two different opportunities to fight me and chose to go a different route, so chill. Let the kid make his mark in the sport. But the problem I have with this statement is this.
And listen, this is just my personal view on it. And a lot of people may disagree with me on this particular point, but do I also agree with Terence Bud Crawford that a Jaron Boots-Ennis fight would not be the greatest for his career? I agree with that to a certain degree, and the reason why I say that is because for a lot of us that watch Jaron Boots-Ennis, we all know that Jaron Boots-Ennis is a very talented fighter. But from Terence Bud Crawford's perspective, he's 36 years old. And at this point, he's only got 2 to 3 years left, maybe, and he's looking to make legacy fights. I don't even think that he wants to rematch with Errol Spence Jr. because I think that he already sees that as, been there, done that, and I kind of understand that. I think Terence Bud Crawford is looking at fights possibly at 154, which is where I would go next if I'm Terence Bud Crawford. And then, of course, at 160, potentially having a fight against Saul Canelo Alvarez if Canelo, of course, can last, that long because he is aging, to a degree. I understand he's 33 years old, but he's also been fighting for 18 professional years. So that takes a little bit of a toll on you, especially when you fight the names that he has. But anyways, not to get off subject here. But anyways, when it comes to Terence Bud Crawford, I think the thing is a Jaron Boots-Ennis, and this is why a certain amount of fighters, especially champions, they don't like to fight certain upcoming fighters because they take a look at them and a lot of people will say, oh, they're just ducking them because they're a big threat. Well, they certainly realize that they're a big threat. And I think that Terence Bud Crawford will even tell you that Jaron Boots-Ennis is a very talented fighter. But once again, when it comes to the business and when it comes to that of the legacy side of boxing, Jaron Boots-Ennis just recently became a champion through the IBF title. He was reinstated, or not reinstated, excuse me, but, he was kind of given that title because Terence Bud Crawford pretty much gave it up. And I think the way that Terence Bud Crawford looks at it is that this kid basically has no one on his resume. He's a kid overall that is just starting his career. If I beat him, people will pretty much say that he was a little bit too green, just like a certain amount of other people have been trying to tear down my wins in my career, And on top of that, if I end up losing to him, then I end up losing to a guy that's a little bit inexperienced. Why would I want to take that fight when there's more fights that could do possibly more for my legacy, in terms of that of the Tim Tszyu, Jamel Charlo, Saul Canelo Alvarez fights, why would I want to take that fight when I can possibly take those fights? And once again, certain people might say that, oh, that's a little bit of a duck, but I understand Terence Bud Crawford's perspective. We can take a look at it in other weight divisions as well. Like, not a lot of these channels talk about it, but David Benavidez completely avoided that fight with David Morrell. He could have took the David Morrell fight, which in my view would have been at least 5 times, more dangerous than the Demetrius Andrade fight. A dude that's a better athlete than Demetrius Andrade, and a guy that has a lot of great potential. But the thing is about David Morrell, and Eddie Hearn said the same thing. Why would you want to fight David Morrell right now? He doesn't have a belt. He's not a huge, huge, huge name in the sport. And on top of that, you're not going to get a big payday with him. So the thing is that why really would you want to fight him? If you're not going to get a big payday, if he doesn't offer you a belt, and then on top of that, if you even beat him, which there's no guarantee because he's very talented, people might just say that, oh, he was a little bit too green. Why would you want to take that fight? And that's why there's certain people that they're always a little bit, tentative, to take on some of those, very dangerous up-and-coming fighters that don't have a belt and don't have as big of a name. And that's why, at one point in time, when you've seen Lomachenko versus Devin Haney, Loma was a little bit tentative to take that fight with Devin Haney because not only did he realize that he was a threat, but he just thought that he was a little bit too green and that at the time, in terms of a title and other stuff, that he just didn't bring as much to the table as what he would have liked. You've seen it a little bit with Canelo and David Benavidez. You've seen it with Mayweather and Keith Thurman. And now you're seeing it with Terence Bud Crawford, and that of Jaron Boots-Ennis. That just happens. David Benavidez and David Morrell, it happens a lot in boxing. And I don't really mind their perspectives because, once again, we can criticize David Benavidez for not taking the David Morrell fight because, in my view, David Morrell is more of a challenge than that of Demetrius Andrade. But Andrade is a former two-weight division champion. He probably even has a little bit of a bigger name than that of David Morrell. And on top of that, Demetrius Andrade is a guy that's kind of had ties, at least his name mentioned with that of the Canelo Alvarez fight in the past, so that pretty much was the perfect fight, not just in terms of a challenge, but also in terms of marketing that David Benavidez could take. I think for Terence Bud Crawford that I just don't think that he's interested in a Jaron Boots-Ennis fight, and I can't really blame him. Why would you really want to take that fight when it's a super dangerous fight? You're probably not going to get a super big payday because Jaron Boots-Ennis is not a megastar in the sport yet, and on top of that, even if you beat him, if it's a very tough fight, that could potentially take a year off your career and ruin your potential plans. In my view, what Terence Bud Crawford should do, and I've been saying this now for the past couple months, ever since he beat Errol Spence Jr., he should be trying to go to the 154-pound weight division and go undisputed there. That way, and I understand that he wants that Canelo Alvarez fight, but go after that weight division first, because if you become the first man, or the first person to ever be undisputed in 3 separate weight divisions, there will be many people comparing you to Muhammad Ali, Floyd Mayweather Jr., Chavez, Roberto Duran, whatever guy you put in your top 10. Sugar Ray Leonard, Roy Jones Jr., whoever the hell else you put in your top 10 or top 20. People will be comparing you to those types of fighters. All right? So that, in my view, whether you agree with it or not, people will at least bring it up in the conversation. So that's why Terence Bud Crawford, in my view, I just don't think that he's super interested in this fight because I don't think that he thinks Jaron Boots-Ennis brings enough to the table. At least not yet.
He's trying to make his mark, and he's trying to make his mark with you. And the hypocrisy of it all is outstanding. It's really astonishing, people, because the way Crawford is acting towards fighting Boots is exactly what he claims, but it's really happening with Boots. I personally don't think.
Well, listen, this is a thing, and I understand Boxing Ego's point, but I don't think that he gets the difference between the two situations. When Terence Bud Crawford, and I never agreed with the fact that, Terence was being avoided by all these guys, because at the end of the day, it was his decision to re-sign with Top Rank multiple times. That was his decision. So I've always agreed with Boxing Ego on that particular point. That was a move. That was Terence Bud Crawford's fault. But even if you were going to go along with the narrative, let's just say for, argument's sake, that those guys were avoiding Terence Bud Crawford. The thing is that Terence Bud Crawford was in the middle of his prime, a champion, and he was already an established fighter. So people already knew who Terence Bud Crawford was, and they were waiting for the big fights to happen. With Jaron Boots-Ennis, he's looking for a mark and he's looking for a big fight, but he's not an established fighter. He hasn't really fought anyone in his career yet. He did just get a belt, but once again, he's not giving you a grand payday. And even if you beat him once again, it is kind of possibly, the Fernando Vargas effect, where you beat him and, it looks impressive at the time, but that later on throughout his career, let's just say that he beats him or knocks him out, and Jaron Boots-Ennis, he never wins another big fight in his career, or he never wins a big fight in his career. People will take a look at that win 20 years later on down the line and say, well, he was okay, but was he really ever that great in the first place? And I think that's what Terence Bud Crawford and a certain amount of other fighters really take a look at it as. They're saying, I'm not fighting this guy that looks potentially dangerous, but on top of that, doesn't bring enough money to the table when I can get bigger paydays out there. And on top of that, is not going to do the most for my legacy anyway, because he does not have a namesake. He's not an established fighter. So once again, that's why, I don't really blame Terence Bud Crawford for not taking this fight. Just my personal view of it.
What he was saying was accurate, but nonetheless, whether you believe what Crawford said or not, Crawford said that PBC was playing keep away. And basically, when he was with Top Rank, they wouldn't send no guys, and they were all fighting each other, Wanty. Now he just beat Errol Spence, phenomenal performance. He's at the top of the totem pole. There's a guy who's his mandatory, who he got stripped by not arranging to fight him, or I guess.
I will say this: there is a lot of people or a lot of Terence Bud Crawford fans that are complaining, and I do agree with Boxing Ego on this point. I don't mind Terence Bud Crawford personally giving up his IBF title. When it comes down to it, I don't really mind that. But you cannot complain, when Terence Bud Crawford, when he ends up getting stripped, when he says, I'm not fighting Jaron Boots-Ennis, the mandatory, and I'm more than likely going to go into the rematch clause with Errol Spence Jr. You can't get mad when he ends up getting stripped. Now there's a difference between dropping a title because you don't think that fight is necessarily quite worth it at the moment or yet, and there's a difference between dropping a title because you're just completely avoiding a fighter. Like when Mikey Garcia dropped his WBC title at 135 because he knew that Vasily Lomachenko was coming for it next. That in my view, is definitely worth a lot of criticism because Vasily Lomachenko was already an established fighter. Now, there was a lot of criticism, of course, towards Lomachenko for dropping his WBC title because Devin Haney was his mandatory. But even that, in my view, is a little bit more understandable because he realized that Haney was going to be a little bit of a threat. But on top of that, that he was not an established fighter yet. So, just like Mayweather did with some of his opponents, he said, when I beat you, you're going to have at least a decent win on your record. That way, people will take a look at it as a great win because I'm not fighting someone that's not an established fighter. And this is a tactic that's been used by a certain amount of other fighters. And I don't mind the tactic, and Canelo has done that before as well. He's doing it right now with David Benavidez.
Probably doing interviews and saying he's not going to fight him, whatever, right? And now you're saying everything but, hey, I'll scrap with Boots, right? Everyone, I know y'all loving Boots. I'm just trying to find in here where it says anything about after you handle business with Errol Spence, Boots is next on the chopping block, right? Says
it's because Terence Bud Crawford, he's not interested in a Jaron Boots-Ennis fight. He's already stated it, and once again, I don't blame him.
I'm happy for the young guy, but chill on the ducking him part. Boots had opportunities to fight me. And what were those opportunities? Because if he's talking about where he did a one-off with BLK Prime, I don't know what the two opportunities, it's pretty ambiguous. But I heard this narrative that when he was with BLK Prime, sent some kind of offer to BOXINGEGO. But again, let's just be real. Is that the way to conduct business? Why? I feel like you don't really want to make the fight if the business is backwards, right? I remember Top Rank said that they sent Angel Garcia a offer to fight Crawford on Top Rank. why would you be reaching out to the father and trainer as opposed to Danny Garcia's handlers, which is Al Heyman? You know what I mean? So why would you send anything to BOXINGEGO to really make the fight? Beyond that, I mean, do we really fault Boots? Let's say, I'm just saying, we're just spitballing. Hypothetically, let's say Boots got this offer from BOK Prime to fight Crawford and he turned it down. Do you really blame him when it's on an obscure app? Like, where is BOK Prime right now? Like, literally today? Because last time I seen, they were doing like Tuesday night fights and fights in Venezuela and Suge Knight documentaries and stuff. Crawford served one fight with them, and that was it. That was about it. So why would Boots take some offer from some unknown commodity anyway? You know what I mean? It doesn't really make sense. But Crawford's claiming that Boots had 2 opportunities to fight him and chose to go a different route. I don't know if he's merely talking about the ranking system, because Boots might have been ranked 1 or whatever, and I don't know.
I'm not really quite sure myself, but once again, I don't really mind the route that Terence Bud Crawford is going down. I think a Jaron Boots-Ennis fight would be a great fight, of course, because I think that he's a great talent. But the fights that I would prefer to see would be the Tim Tszyu and the Jermell Charlo fights. In my view, those are the fights that I would prefer to see. Not because I think that either of those fighters are more talented than Jaron Boots-Ennis. I think that Boots is a better fighter than both of those guys, just in my personal view. But at the end of the day, I think that those 2 fights, I still think that they're very great fights for Crawford, and I think that they're bigger legacy fights, at least at the current moment in time.
My thing is this. With the ranking system, Boots is a great fighter, so he was probably ranked with 2 different sanctioning bodies, or at least 2 or more than 1, basically. So at the same time, is you got a lot of guys do that where they choose an IBF route, or like, hey, if I just, like Errol Spence did that. Errol Spence, he was probably ranked with the WBC or somebody else, but he had good progress with the IBF, and he was trying to fight Kell Brook, so he just stayed on that track. That's not a duck. You see what I'm saying? That's not a duck when you're on the path that you believe is the best and you fast track it. Like, because if you look at Crawford-Ennis, a lot of his opponents were also ranked in the IBF, like Roman Villa, right? Guys like Sergey Lipinets, guys like Castillo Clayton. So he's clearly been on the IBF path up until.
Let me also state this, and I hope that this changes within the next 10 years, next 10 to 20 years within boxing. But this shit where fighters are like 25 and 30 something and 0 when it comes down to it, and they haven't fought one single champion or haven't fought one single A-grade fighter. That shit has to go. That shit has to really change in boxing. And I think that really has been affected ever since that of the Floyd Mayweather Jr. era. I'm not saying that there was not certain fighters in the past. Of course, you've seen Chavez that, he was 89 and 0 when it came down to it, and he, had not fought, just every single great fighter, within every single one of his fights, and of course, back in the old days, they fought, a bunch of bums a lot of the times to get to, 100 plus wins. But at the end of the day, this is the current era of boxing where you're fighting, 2, 3, 4 times a year. When you start to get in that 15 to 20 range, you should be fighting at least one somewhat, pretty decent champion. If it's not A grade, you should at least be fighting a B grade level champion, something like that. When you get around to that 20 and 0 mark, I mean, there's just way too many fighters today, in my view, that are 20, 30 and 0, and they barely have any recognizable names on their record. Like I remember Leo Santa Cruz, like he was like 31 and 0 or something like that. When he finally fought his first big fight, I think against like Abner Mares, and then later on against Carl Frampton. And now you have, Deontay Wilder, who was like 30 something and 0 before he finally fought someone worthwhile. You have Jaron Boots-Ennis that's like, 26, 27 and 0 right now, somewhere along there. He hasn't really fought any great fighters. I'm not blaming it all on him, but once again, I hope that that's something that really does change because, how the hell are you going to later on get, that many champions on your resume, or get a dozen or more champions on your resume or decent fighters when, you're like 30 and 0 and you're almost like 31 years old. Now, Jaron Boots-Ennis is like 26, so he's got quite a bit of time. He may even be younger than that. But there's certain other
The
fighters
lie
out there like
when he
Javante
fought
Tank
Errol
Davis.
Spence.
Excuse me. There's other fighters out there like Javante Tank Davis. Like he's almost like 30-0 right now. And I don't know if he has one definitive A-grade fighter on his resume. Like like the man is 30 years old and he hasn't fought Shakur Stevenson. He hasn't fought Lomachenko. He hasn't fought Teofimo Lopez. He hasn't fought Regis Prograis. He hasn't fought Jose Ramirez, Josh Taylor, Shakur Stevenson. Like, he hasn't fought any of those guys. Devin Haney.
Crawford only had the WBO belt. You know what I mean? So if Jaron-Ennis was ranked with the WBO, but he had been making further progress with the IBF, then why would he lose his positioning with the IBF trying to do something when he knows he could get to you either way? So I don't really understand that. However, that's the message from Crawford. Boots-Ennis did clap back, and he says, y'all be betraying this. I think he means portraying. I don't know, because that don't make sense. Boots says, y'all be portraying. I'm going to just fill in the word what I think the word is supposed to be. Y'all be portraying this image for the net. Stop capping. And he posted this right after Crawford's tweet. But even more direct, Jaron Boots-Ennis says, Bud Crawford had opportunities to fight me, and he still do. So he's saying it's still up. The offer is still good. But you rather them strip you and give me the title instead of making me take it from you because you don't want to fight me that bad. That stunt you pulled is see-through. And as you guys can see, this is Crawford's trainer, Bomac, on Crawford versus Jaron-Ennis. He don't bring nothing to the table. Terence is at the stage of his career where he can pick and choose. If he doesn't want to fight Boots because he doesn't bring anything to the table, I'm going to ride with it. So yet again, you have Crawford who he's saying like, oh, stop saying I'm ducking and stuff like that. And I haven't put that out. I haven't like just outright said he's ducking. But at the same time, it's a fight.
Well, you're kind of alleging it. For you to say multiple times that Terence Bud Crawford, that it's a bad look for Terence Bud Crawford. I mean, what are we supposed to insinuate from that?
That people want to see. I definitely want to see. And Boots is saying it's still up. And you're talking about, oh, F the IBF and they stripped me and all this stuff. He's saying, come get the belt. So I feel like you're saying it's not a big fight, it's not a mega fight, but it's making the fight bigger because he has something that you feel is yours. And the IBF, if you think they stripped you on a technicality, go ahead and get it. Go ahead and get it from Jaron-Ennis.
I understand Boxing Ego's point, but like I said, there's such a thing as the business and the legacy side of boxing, and I don't think that Terence Bud Crawford believes that either of those would really check the box in terms of Jaron Boots-Ennis. I think he knows that a Tim Tszyu or a Jamel Charlo fight would do bigger, in his personal opinion, and I think he believes that it would do more for his legacy because it's a new weight division. Of course, Jaron Boots-Ennis, in my view, is an extraordinary talent, but he's just not an established fighter. And this happens all the time in boxing. And, I think Terence Bud Crawford is basically saying that if you want to fight with me, you're going to have to establish a name for yourself first because you don't really bring anything to the table for me right now.
But instead, he's like, let the guy make his mark and, let him do his thing and blah, blah, blah. But there's an easy solution. In my opinion, there's a very easy solution here. If you fight Boots, it'll be no worse than a lot of the guys on your resume, to be honest. Ray Beltran or Mean Machine or David Avocado. You know what I mean?
Right, but that's the exact reason why he's not fighting him, Mr. Boxing Ego, because a lot of people are just going to say that he was way too green and that, oh, you defeated a fighter that never fought an A-grade fighter before while you were the number one pound-for-pound fighter. Even Floyd Mayweather Jr. did the same tactic. Like when he fought Canelo Alvarez, he didn't fight him immediately. He said, Canelo, if you want to fight with me, you're gonna have to beat someone. You're gonna have to beat Austin Trout at the very least because I don't want to beat you. And then people say that I just defeated a nobody or that I defeated you when you were way too green. And then people still said after Mayweather defeated Canelo that he defeated him when he was a little bit too young and green. And Canelo probably wasn't as experienced as Mayweather in terms of championship level fights. Against elite A-grade caliber competition. All that's understood. And I think that, he was a prime level fighter. I don't think he was at his peak form. I think that probably came at around, 2017, somewhere around there, But, when it comes down to it, he still was a great fighter. He still was one of the top 10 pound-for-pound fighters, so Mayweather still deserves a lot of credit for that win.
Not like Boots is underskilled compared to them. You know what I mean? So it'd be a good fight. You just
Right, but it's not necessarily about the skills. Once again, and this is what people don't understand. It's about what do you bring to the table for me. It's not about the skills. Because once again, if we're talking about, oh, well, we should just fight the most skilled fighters possible, then David Benavidez should be fighting David Morrell right now and not Demetrius Andrade, because he's the most dangerous opponent possibly for him. He turned that fight down for a reason. Because he knows that, and Eddie Hearn said it best, you'd be insane to take David Morrell right now because he doesn't bring anything for you. He doesn't bring a mega payday. He don't bring a belt. He's not an established fighter. Why the fuck would you want to fight David Morrell right now? And it's the same thing, I think, with this situation. That's why I don't mind it.
literally last year, like 1 year ago, next month, you fought David Avanesian. So now you're above and beyond it because you beat Errol Spence, the guy who did the heavy lifting for the 3 belts. Now you're way too big to fight Boots. It doesn't look right to me. Let me know what you guys think. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Best in the business. Introducing.
Anyways, that's pretty much about it for me on this video. But, once again, am I going to state once again that Terence Bud Crawford is avoiding Jaron Boots-Ennis? Well, I think that he's not interested in the fight, but I'm not really going to call it a duck because, once again, I understand Terence Bud Crawford's perspective, and he's not the first and the only fighter, and he's not going to be the last to have this perspective, because in order for, a big fight to happen, especially when you're 36 years old, that fight's got to bring something to the table for you. And I don't think that he believes that a fight, with him would bring something to the table. Tyson Fury also had a very similar opinion with that of Dillian White, where he said that I don't think that Dillian White brings much to the table for me. I think that I would beat him pretty easy. And we all know that the LDBC and the media, they said, oh, Fury, is avoiding him and ducking him like Dante's Boxing Nation. He tried to say, oh, well, rumors and sparring had it that Dillian White knocked out Tyson Fury. And since Fury hasn't addressed these, we all know that it must be true, blah, blah, blah. Then the fight happens and Tyson Fury completely embarrasses Dillian White, knocks him out, in 6 rounds. But it's like I understand the perspective of these fighters because once again it's like, why would you really want to take those fights when there's other fights out there that bring more to the table? So it's I understand. Jaron Boots-Ennis, in terms of a talent, is he probably the most talented fighter that he could fight right now, at least along his weight divisions? Yeah, probably. But in terms of bringing something to the table, both business wise, monetary wise, and legacy wise, I think he thinks there's bigger things out there. Just in my personal view. So that's pretty much what I think about it. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.